Hello, lovelies. It's me again, Mrs. Hardiman, with your lesson for today. And you are seventh grade, and I will be posting corresponding assignments to go along with this and further videos as time goes on. Take out your notebooks, something to write with. Pause me while you do that. Okay. Now, the first thing I wanted to remind you of is where we left off yesterday. So we had the passage of the Stamp Act. Now, the Stamp Act comes after the previous passages. We had the Proclamation of 1763, which limited settlement beyond the Appalachian Mountains. There was also the Sugar Act, which lowers the tax of molasses, which is supposed to spur revenue for the king, who is still in debt from the French and Indian War. We also had the imposition of the Vice Admiralty Courts, which again is a trial without a jury. All of these measures hoping to stop the amount of smuggling that's going on, again, so the king can get more revenue. And then with the passage of the Stamp Act in 1765, this is really kind of the last straw that the colonists have, because with the Stamp Act, it's different in terms of a tax than it is on say, sugar. Also, keep in mind that with the Sugar Act, one of the most hardest hit places by that tax, one of the places that is most engaged in smuggling and things of that sort is, of course, Massachusetts and Boston. We remember John Hancock. He is the wealthiest man in Boston. He owns a fleet of merchant vessels, and a lot of his merchant ships are engaged in that trade with the Caribbean being producers of sugar, and the main buyers of sugar being people in Boston and New England, who then take that molasses and they use it, yes, in their cooking, but they also use it to distill it into rum, into other products and items like that. So the Sugar Act had a very strong impact on Boston, New England especially, which is why you see, so much tension there from the get-go. But when you have the passage of the Stamp Act affects Americans across the board. All Americans are affected by the Stamp Act because the way that the tax is done is through an actual literal stamp that is placed onto paper products. Any printed material, any printed good. And so who are the people who are buying these things? It's literally everybody, okay? You have people who are buying newspapers so that they can be up to date on the daily goings on of the world. You have people who are paying the Stamp Act tax on things like books to read, school books, textbooks. Education is having to pay into the Stamp Act. Playing cards, games, children's games, paper dolls, things of these sort, also all taxed. Women would used to use these printed out paper dress forms so that they could figure out how to do certain measurements and to make, they're called patterns, to make different outfits. These things are also taxed. Anything that can be put on paper is affected by the Stamp Act tax. And so one of the things that really alarms the colonists is the amount that the Stamp Act has to affect their daily lives. People in their daily lives, they cannot send a letter, correspond with a loved one without first paying a tax to King George III overseas. People cannot buy things, gifts for people, cards, anything, without having to pay a tax to the king. So this really upsets people, and it makes people notice that there's also being kind of a push down on personal rights, such as the right to communicate freely with that Stamp Act. So we have a few effects of the Stamp Act right off the bat. We had the Virginia Burgesses. We had Patrick Henry with his impassioned speech where he says, if this is treason, let's make the most of it. Let's make the best of treason while we can. And he appeals the House of Burgesses in Virginia to write a formal resolution. Remember, a resolution is an opinion that is formalized. It's written down. They send this opinion off to the king saying, hey, we don't think that you should have the ability to tax us. The Virginia Assembly can tax Virginia, and the king can tax subjects in England. So they sent that off. Does the king respond with any understanding? No, he does not. Next, you have the formation of the Sons of Liberty, and that's where we left off yesterday with the Sons of Liberty, the formation of the Sons of Liberty. One of the most active figures in the Sons of Liberty is Sam Adams. Sam Adams is active in Boston. He is a brewer as well, but he also has his hand in a lot of different businesses. Sam Adams and a lot of other notable Bostonians of of that time, such as Paul Revere, who we have read about in the book Johnny Tremaine. Paul Revere, yes, he was a real person. He was a silversmith, and he was also involved in the Sons of Liberty. Now, the Sons of Liberty is an organization which begins in Boston, but it is spread out throughout the rest of the 13 colonies pretty quickly, again, with the flow of paper from the printing press. Are these pamphlets being taxed by the Stamp Act? Yes, they are. So all of these correspondences are. Now, the Sons of Liberty do not send out a formal resolution the way that the Virginia House of Burgesses did. No. They're the ones that are tying up the effigies, these lifelike dummies of tax collectors in Boston and various people who the king has doing his work over in the colony, such as the governor of Boston. So they're dressing up these dummies in these costumes to look like officers of Britain and to look like people who are working for the king, and they're setting them on fire and they're parading them through the city of Boston, and they're shouting things and they're chanting, no Stamp Act, no Stamp Act, repeal, repeal, repeal. Remember, the word repeal means to take away. So that's what the Sons of Liberty are doing. They're also organizing boycotts, and along with the organization of boycotts and things like that, you have one of the first times that you see the different colonies come together, and they congregate in the creation of something known as the Stamp Act Congress. Now, the Stamp Act Congress is made up of 9 different colonies who each send out their own delegates. Delegates are elected representatives. These are men who are chosen by people from their colony to represent their best interests, to represent their ideas, and to represent what they want. Now, the Stamp Act Congress gets together, and look at, I made these. Isn't this cute? Look at this. Okay. So the Stamp Act Congress, they draft a position to the king and the parliament saying, we can only tax ourselves. You cannot tax us. So I'll give you a second to write that down. So the Stamp Act Congress, they draft a position to the king and to the parliament saying that they can only tax themselves, that the parliament and the king cannot tax the people. And that was what the Stamp Act Congress does. They send off that petition to King George III. Now, the Stamp Act Congress and the Sons of Liberty, once they send off that petition to the king, they also organize their own boycotts. Now, what a boycott is, it's when you refuse to buy something from a specific group, or you refuse to spend money on a specific group or a specific producer or a specific service provider. Now, in this case, the boycott is going directly towards British goods, British manufactured goods, British raw materials, anything that Britain can essentially tax or get any benefit from whatsoever. The Stamp Act Congress is urging American folks to not buy any British goods, because if they are not buying British goods, then hopefully the British merchants will be listening out, and the British merchants who are able to share their voice in Parliament and talk to the king will get their point across. So what they have here is they have the Stamp Act Congress and the Sons of Liberty, who are organizing boycotts. And boycotts are when you refuse to buy British goods. Now, along with the Stamp Act Congress organizing these boycotts, they also have thousands of people. And when I say people, I mean merchants, artisans, store owners, buyers and sellers. People are signing these non-importation agreements, the non-importation agreement. And what that means is that they are agreeing to not buy any imported goods from Britain. They are agreeing to not buy any imported goods from Britain, so that way when people can go into a store, they know that all the goods being sold in that store were made or produced in America. So what people could do is they could sign a non-importation agreement, hang it right in the store that they own, and that way when buyers go there, they know that that store doesn't have anything being sold from Britain. So Britain's not getting any piece of the economic pie that is the American consumer base. Now, what is the effect of all this? Well, of course, it is the desired effect. The British merchants end up begging for repeal. The British merchants want the king to repeal the Stamp Act. They want him to repeal it. Why would British merchants want the king to repeal the Stamp Act? The answer is very simple. The British merchants are the guys whose stuff is being boycotted. So yes, the king is losing out on his revenue, but these British merchants are losing out on their customers. And their customers are really the base that's keeping the entire economic system flowing and working. So these British merchants who do have a voice in Parliament are going to Parliament, they're talking, and they are saying, listen, we need the Stamp Act to be repealed so that the American consumers will come back and buy British goods. Now, what happens next is wild. 1766. Remember, right now we are in the middle of that timeline zone. We had 1763, which is the Proclamation Act. We had 1764, which is the Sugar Act. 1765 is the Stamp Act. 1766, ladies and gentlemen, is repeal. It's the repeal. And then in 1766, remember, we read that poem in class by Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley wrote that poem that was celebrating King George III for the repeal of the Stamp Act. Yay! Repeal of the Stamp Act. But on the same day that the Stamp Act was repealed, on the same day that the Stamp Act was repealed, on the same day that the Stamp Act was repealed, King George III signs in 1766, on the same day as the Stamp Act repeal, the Declaratory Acts. Ba-da-dum! What the Declaratory Act is essentially saying that the Parliament and the King have the right to tax the colonies in all cases. In all cases, the Parliament and the King can tax the colonies. And what this essentially is doing is it's rejecting the petition. It's rejecting the petition that was sent by the Stamp Act Congress. And it's rejecting the resolution that was sent out by the Virginia Burgesses. And here is this is the colonies. The Americans, this is a petition. King, have you read our position? Bah! What about our resolution, our formalized opinion about how you should treat us with rights and allow us to tax ourselves? But can't we tax ourselves? No, you cannot tax yourselves. Well, actually, yes, you can, but you also must pay my taxes. But we don't want you to tax us. I get to do what I want. And so that is the effect of the Stamp Act. And the repeal of the Stamp Act. So even though the Stamp Act is repealed, which the king was hoping would placate the American colonists from their issues and fears of oppression and tyranny, essentially by signing the Declaratory Acts in the same day, he is saying, I'll repeal the Stamp Act, but I am the one with the power to tax you. And if you don't like it, it's treason. Wow. Isn't history great? Now here's our review time. Wah, 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 wah. So what role did Sam Adams play in the colonial protests? What role did Sam Adams play in colonial protests? Do 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 do. Boom, boom. Okay, put your answers into the comments, and until next time, I'm gonna post you some more assignments and stuff. I want to talk about the Quartering Act when we come back, and stay happy, stay healthy. I miss you. I'm thinking of all of you. And with that last quiz, those 2 questions that everybody got wrong, I don't know. I'm learning the quiz system. In my grade book, I'm giving you guys all the points that you got, that you earned. Yes, keep working with me. Bye.